an interesting kind of conflict we run into at Brightwater Homes is we love doing solar, we build net zero, but we've been running into too many trees, too much canopy. So right now we're having the debate, do we take down more trees or do we not install solar? So we're healthy debate internally on that, around the natural, sustainable landscaping side of it. For our sponsor today, pizza, we want to appreciate Tracy with T-Clear and FinPan. So Tracy, the floor is yours.
I'm Tracy Dietz with FinPan and T-Clear. We manufacture with foam. And what makes us unique with foam and marrying it with concrete is we're fully integrated. So every piece that comes into our facility is used and recycled in-house to be reused. Nothing is then deposited back into the earth. It's all used, or has its purposes everywhere from being used as a building material in our shower systems, or in our building envelope of exterior building products as insulation, even to the point where the products that we take as recycled items, when somebody opens up their box of Amazon products and then brings that foam and drops it off at in our dumpsters, that product is then cut up into chunks and then put into other particles. Whenever you see those drainage pipes with the foam pieces, inside of that we use every bit of it. Every bit of it is ultimately reused and everything. So I appreciate everyone allowing me to be here and looking forward to the presentation also.
All right. Thanks, Tracy.
All right. Thank you.
Chris, bite of pizza. Thomas. All right. It's all you.
All right. So, good evening, everybody. Again, Thomas Billups Homes. And I invited Trace here tonight. And it really started quite honestly, out of a bit of laziness, because I'm tired of cutting the grass and taking care of mowing and blowing and all that stuff that we've got to do all the time at home. And so I was looking for some alternatives. So I started experimenting. And I'm planting all kinds of stuff that doesn't, that I now know that probably ain't the best stuff to be planting. And I've got the standard builder grade, it's 30-year-old home, but all the builder grade landscaping is all overgrown. Most of the stuff is too big, any kind of trees or shrubs or any of that stuff. So we're constantly battling it, essentially. And so looking for some alternative. I mean, I've done herbs and and I don't have a backyard. My backyard is basically Stone Mountain Park, ties into my backyard, and it's just a forest. So I'm doing this in my front yard. I've got herbs, and I tried fruit. I mean, I got strawberries and blueberries, and I tried a watermelon. Don't do that unless you got because it'll grow from here to the peach tree, but yeah, and then so we were at one of the Earthcraft updates at the Home Builder Association, and Amelia's going through the program update, and she says, I think she's doing it Badgers or something, and she mentions something about landscaping, and I was probably half asleep, my head popped up because I'm right there in the midst of this battle, so, but we kind of blew past it because she said, nobody does that. And so I went up afterwards and kind of asked some questions, and then maybe a month later, we were at another HBA event. We did the Cottages at Vaughan tour, Cottages on Vaughan, the tiny house community in Clarkston. And Mayor Ted Terry at the time of Clarkston mentioned, and during the whole presentation, they mentioned the landscaping. And Trace at the time was working for a company called Roots Down, and they had consulted on the landscaping, and the landscaping there is all sustainable. So I was like, damn it, this is exactly what I've been looking for. So I tracked these guys down. We had met for coffee the next week, and so that's basically kind of how this whole thing started. And I consulted with Roots Down. Trace has actually done several landscapes for me. I think some of the pictures are going to show us some of the homes that we've done. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So if anybody's feeling those same kinds of pains that I am, pay attention, and hopefully we'll get you some answers.
All right, everybody. I am Trace. I am the owner of Greenbox Homes. And we are a sustainable landscaping company. We do, we're full stack, so we'll do projects. Primarily, we stick to things that create natural solutions for environmental problems. So we're not going to do like big grade, like water transfer type systems. We're going to try and find organic ways to slow the water down and infiltrate it on site versus trying to send it as quickly somewhere else. But we do all that all the way to maintenance. I'll talk a little bit more about us a little bit later, but let's just dive right into it. What we're going to be talking about today is how you can grow a natural envelope. One of the things, it was actually very interesting, I spoke on Monday, gave very similar presentation at an event on Monday, and the person who spoke before me had been a big-time advisor for Earthcraft and Earthcraft building, and so it was very interesting because he talked a lot about the envelope, a tight envelope around the house, right? Where you're really kind of keeping pollutants and things out, keeping the heat and energy where you want it. So what we're going to be talking about today is how you can extend that thought process, the Earthcraft thought process, out to the edge of the property. So for starters, I'm Trace. I'm a garden experimenter. Obviously, I was significantly younger when this picture was taken. This was my first harvest ever. I had grown a couple of carrots. I moved into a house with a greenhouse. This is where it was kind of the foretelling my story. So I moved into a place with a greenhouse, but actually had no interest in growing things 15 years ago when I moved into this home. But I got the bug and I decided to grow something, and this was it. Year one, 10 years ago, I grew 4 carrots, right? So if you're ever feeling bad about your first gardening efforts, don't. This is what I was able to do. But the thing I love about this picture, aside from me looking ridiculous, is that it kind of tells the whole story. Is those 4 carrots bewitched me. They bewitched me. The fact that I was able to just put a seed in the ground and then 60 days later I got something I could eat and it tasted good, it was like, it just completely changed the way I thought about the world. And from that moment on, about 10 years ago, I've been on kind of a journey to discover better and better ways to incorporate my life, my actual lived experience in the world, with the earth that we live on, and intertwine those as much as possible, given the modern existence we live in, right? I am a father of 2. Obviously, children are a huge catalysts for thinking about your future and what the mark you want to put on the world, which is why I mentioned that. I'm a writer. That's kind of where I come from that trade. I'm more of a copywriter and brand marketing kind of person. That's where I initially came from. An entrepreneur. This is actually my 3rd business, so I have that's another bug I have, is the wanting to start new businesses. But mainly I'm a land steward. The kind of conversion you see in the person who's trying to mug for the camera here, it changed me. I realized that the land, what we stand on, was what I wanted to devote the rest of my life to. Trying to perfect it, make it better, and make it so that it will not just give back to my kids and my grandchildren, but my grandchildren's grandchildren, right? And that's what I feel our responsibility is. Now, what I'm going to do, I keep thinking this is my sunglasses, because it's exactly where I put my sunglasses. Right. Let's talk about modern landscaping. Right? You all know what modern landscaping is. I'm sure when he said builder grade landscape, y'all had a picture in your head of what that was, right? But here's the truth about it, is it is an absolute ecological disaster. There are 50 million acres of turf lawn in the US. Just think about this, to put that number in context. How many millions of acres do you think that we use for all orchard activities in the US?
Just orchards?
Just orchards.
Not strawberries or lettuce?
No, just orchard trees. Million? It's 10 million. So if we were to turn all that turf into orchards, we would increase our orchard production by 5 times, right? Instead, what we're doing is spending 3.2 trillion gallons of water every year irrigating turf, which is the #1 irrigated crop in the US. We're also spending $2.7 billion or billion gallons of gasoline on maintaining that turf and all the lovely non-native invasive plants that we put everywhere. But the great thing about that number, to give you kind of even more context to it, is that gasoline mostly is spent on 2-stroke engines, which are incredibly inefficient. They're about 30% efficient. which means that 70% of that 2.7 billion is actually just spilled on the ground or put in the air or put in our lungs, right, as pollution. So, or destroys our ears with hearing. With loudness, right? So these are just three of the things that it screws up from an ecological standpoint, but it's wasting an enormous amount of energy. It's also a health disaster. Hearing loss, the average landscaper does exhibit hearing loss because a leaf blower, gas-powered leaf blower is as loud as a jet engine, so they sit near that all day. Now you'll see many wear headphones, right, throughout the day, but think about this. It's 95 degrees, they're sitting on cement with something on their back, blowing exhaust, and now they've got these big headphones on. It's a miserable job. It's a miserable job because of what we make them do. They also have a really high degree of asthma, and if you've been landscaping for most of your career, you actually, many of them develop like a silica lung, which is similar to miner's lung, because of all the pieces of little silica, glass, and sand that gets in their lungs from just breathing that stuff in and blowing it around all day. Because really, they're not blowing leaves, they're blowing dirt. That's really what they're doing, is blowing topsoil away. The last bit is the landscaping industry is a top 10 most dangerous industries for fatalities as well as just general injuries, according to the CDC. It's up there with like miners, right? So we don't often correlate landscapers with miners being equally dangerous, but they are actually both very dangerous careers. Now, landscapers most people don't do landscaping for their entire career, for one thing, right? So there's not as much of this they do develop asthma. They're also causing asthma in the general environment, right? Like people around them, they're blowing that dust in everybody's lungs, right? But they get a lot of little injuries like finger nicks. They lose fingers at an embarrassingly high rate. They smash their toes. They have a lot of those little injuries, right? But it's also a financial disaster. I wanted to put some of the numbers to what were on that first slide, right? If you go with the average of what a gallon of gas or a gallon of water costs in the US, that 3.2 trillion that they're using is $9.4 billion worth of water used every year to irrigate turf, right? It's a huge waste because if you went with drought-resistant landscapes, you wouldn't even really need to use most of that water. There's also $10 billion spent on gasoline. And so if you consider that the industry is $150 billion a year, 13% of it is just waste represented by just these two inputs, just those two inputs alone. It's not considering the water damage caused by poor irrigation. It's not talking about the enormous amounts of silt found in our sewage. It's not talking about all the waterways that are polluted from chemicals that are overrun into the waters, right? The amount of money that the landscaping industry is costing us every year is an enormous amount, most of it uncounted. But let's look at it practically. This is what it actually looks like in practice. No, these pictures are not switched. This is what you're looking at is a section of a $100,000 landscape renovation that DeKalb County did. And then what you're looking at, what the maintenance crews did to that space within 3 years. That's what they did. Why? Because they sprayed everything with glyphosate. They did not realize that these were water-loving plants, right, that were there to be kind of a water sink, so they weed whacked them down. And eventually, they overseeded with grass because that was the only thing they knew how to do. So they basically just destroyed a landscape and put it in the camp of what they actually know how to maintain. But these are other examples, right? If we're really being honest, if you're going to go with builder-grade landscapes, this is about the best you can hope for, right? This is the best. This is what you're getting, okay? And this is lovely, but the amount of chemicals and energy and inputs required to maintain this at this level are enormous, easily hundreds of dollars every month. This is probably what you're more likely to get, right? The problem is almost all those trees are understory trees, so you're never really going to get a canopy. So the idea of this elm lane or shady lane is never going to happen in a place like this. But what is going to happen is all these little trees are going to get bigger, and what's going to happen to all that grass underneath them? They'll stop growing, and then they'll add more grass, and then they'll go to true green, and they'll go over and over and over again. They'll start spraying all the weeds, and they'll end up destroying it and turning it ultimately into this, which is where what most spaces in America look like. Now, granted, this is winter. I am cheating. This is a winter shot. But you're seeing is that there's not a lot going on there. It's a very boring landscape. The grass is now just a mixture of invasive and native, just like random stuff, right? Which is fine. That actually is the best thing about it, is that's what I would want turf to be. But you can see that there's really very little going on here. The landscape that they had initially has now been fully beaten into submission and destroyed. And the reason why we do this is because we have a complete misunderstanding of the problem, right? Landscapers view themselves as janitors of the outdoors. Their job is to take a mess and clean up the mess and make this room, which we've designated this outdoor room, look the same every day. They want to bring it back to zero. The problem is that's not how nature works. Like they're not working with a room. They're not working with a machine. They're working with a ecosystem that wants to do a certain thing, right? Probably one of the most prescient pieces of media that have come out in the modern age is Jurassic Park, because Dr. Malcolm hit it on the head. Nature wants to grow. It wants to evolve. It wants to change. It will find a way around whatever moat you've built around it. It will find a way. Nature finds a way. So rather than working with that, which is a very interesting palette, right? If you're a painter, you're now getting to work with living things that will change all the time. It's an amazing way to consider your craft. But landscapers aren't craft. They're not performing a craft. They're performing a duty to keep things static. And the only way you do that, if you have something that's always trying to get out of the cage you've built for it, what do you have to do? Continuously fight to keep it in the cage. And that's what landscaping is. It's an input-driven, static industry that has been tasked with taking care of something that wants to live, wants to grow, and wants to change. So what if our yards could be more, right? This is actually the way most yards were for almost all of human history. If you were going to talk about a normal average person, what their yard would have been, because what they understood what your yard was incredibly fertile land that could be used for growing things. So they grew things. And they knew that they needed the bugs and the beetles and the bees in order to grow those things, so they grew things that they liked as well. This is a standard way that people have always grown. But we want to promote diversity. We can grow food, we could save money. With a sustainable landscaping palette, you essentially wipe out that gasoline, and the water numbers, they get wiped out. They're not on the table anymore, so you're saving that money. You're also creating community connection. I'll get to that a little bit later, but there's an odd thing about gardening, and especially gardening out loud, that it actually attracts other people. It's almost like the flowers that are not just attracting bees and butterflies, it's actually attracting people to those spaces because people want to be in them. So you meet your neighbors. That's a very interesting part of it. It lowers temperatures. This is where it directly ties to kind of the Earthcraft mission, is that canopy trees, but not just canopy trees, but shrubs properly placed in alignment with windows and the way the sun moves can actually lower temperatures significantly inside the house just through passive heat transfer. It also will help you save water. Most landscapes that are built in this way, you give them 3 years and they're established, you never need to water them again. Like, true. Those are facts. And this is the kind of landscape that I'm talking about, right? I'll have lots of other pictures later on, but just to wrap your head, like when I say sustainable landscaping, this is what I'm referring to at its like if you talk about it on a continuum, right? From builder grade to what I'm talking about, this is the far end of it, right? Obviously, that's very difficult to play soccer on, right? So there's definitely a space in landscapes for turf, but I don't consider a soccer field landscaping, right? It's a utilitarian space, right?
How drought tolerant? Because we had, I think the last big super drought we had was what, 2008? But it could happen again, of course.
Yeah, these landscapes, very drought tolerant. For year one, no, of course. You'll have to water them well in year one. But by the time you get to year two, they are incredibly drought tolerant. I don't water my yard at all. And I'll show you some pictures from my yard. So the future of landscaping, in my view, both by kind of moral and ethical duty, and also just the truth, is that the inputs of running the landscaping maintenance industry is just, they're going through the roof, right? All the chemicals, the gasoline, the labor, All of the things that go into that are getting more and more expensive. The landscaping industry cannot operate in the way it has been, and I believe that by 2040 it's going to basically either completely transform or be an industry that's like, oh yeah, remember record stores? That kind of thing. But it's electric, it's native, it's drought resistant, it's low input. This is incredibly important. Sustainable, multi-use, and don't forget it can be edible. Edible plants, not only you can eat them, but they also serve ecological and also aesthetic purposes. For instance, a plant I always love to highlight is carrots. They're biennial. If you can either eat the carrot in year one, or you can wait and get a beautiful white flower and it will reseed itself, and you can just have carrots. And carrots grow about this tall with the foliage. They're a beautiful evergreen ground cover, right? But no one thinks about growing carrots in that way. So really sustainable landscaping, right, starts with permaculture. Who here has heard of permaculture? Okay, yeah, good number of you, right? So Holmgren, Toby Hemingway, several other guys in the 70s like rediscovered the way that Native Americans had basically been growing food hundreds of years before that. And kind of collated as a design sense called permaculture. It's obviously a portmanteau based on permanent agriculture. The idea is that it is a self-sustaining food generating system. But what they actually came up with, which are really 12 very interesting design ideas for how to build holistic systems. You can apply many of these same things to a business, right? If you want to run a more holistic business, you can actually apply these design principles to that. So it's not just permaculture, not just agricultural related. It's actually these are very useful heuristics for designing anything, really. These are the 12. I'm not going to go over all 12. If you really want like a primer, if this is something you're interested in, Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway is like the place to start. It's only a 200-page book. It covers everything you need to know about permaculture from one of the early adopters. But I am going to talk about a few of these that are most important to like suburban and urban landscape design. Observe and interact. So you'll see number one here was observe and interact, right? You cannot design a living system with living parts if you don't actually know anything about what you're working with, right? And that includes the actual plot of land you are going to be growing things on. So you need to understand how certain things move through that space. Because while the space is static, the atmosphere, water, sun, people, all those things move over it. So you need to understand how things move through this space. The big ones are water, sun, and people, right? Animals as well. You can kind of get into like animals, especially if it's in a more rural context. But to get a good landscape, these are the three you need to know about. How does water move? How does the sun move around this property? And how do people want to use this property naturally? Right? Now, there are some rules that permaculture came up with called the zones. There are zones 1 through 5. Zone 1 is in the immediate envelope of the home, and then zone 2 goes out, 3, 4, and then 5 is the edge of the property. The idea is that everything that is like a daily use should be zone 1, right? Anything that's like a weekly or every other day use should be zone 2, right? So you should not be placing your tomatoes that you want to use every day in the summer in zone 5 because you will never grab them because you have to walk 20 feet to go get them, right? You put them right on your patio. Herb gardens are always right outside the window, right? So these are the things you want to know about how you're going to use the space. You want to capture energy and produce a yield, right? That's the thing is when you're working with something that wants to grow, you have an opportunity to move that energy. That's energy, right? It wants to produce energy. You can move it where you want it to go. And so that's kind of the purpose of these things. You start with the soil. Good soil will produce anything, right? So you want to build soil first. That's what we always do. Mulching is a great way to do it. Composting, things like that. From a yield standpoint, they always often talk about food. When they do permaculture, they talk about food, like that's the yield, right? But the yield could also be, it could be flowers, right? It could be medicines from the plants. It could be you just want more birds. Like the yield is you want more birds in your yard, right? So you want to actually design towards the yield that you're trying to get. And then you also want to think about the connections, not only between the individual pieces, but also the connection between the home and the outside, the off property, which your property is the opportunity. That's the door. That's the real ante-room of your property. That's how you can bring people in and keep people out. So you want to think about those connections internally and externally. Integrated and slow. These are really important pieces of it. A sustainable landscape is going to try and maximize diversity, right? So you're going to try and maximize plant diversity, biodiversity, from the microorganisms all the way to the birds and the large mammals that might be using that property. So you want to increase diversity. You have to understand this is a thing that wants to grow. That is the key. That is the whole game with landscaping, is you have to understand that what you're working with does not want to stay the same. It doesn't want to. It will not. It will refuse to. And if you make it stay the same, it will die. Right? Or it will become perverted in some way, like bonsai trees are kind of like just kind of bent in ways that are unnatural, but produces, of course, a beautiful artistic effect. But this thing wants to grow. So you have to take that into account. You have to design not for year one and not for when you just put it in the ground, which is obviously a huge kind of draw, right? The clients want something to look really good when you put it in the ground. But you also have to be designing for year 2, 3, year 30. What will this look like in 30 years? And then you also have to be flexible. Taking a slower approach can help you be more flexible, because you might realize problems that may not have been as apparent. Sometimes, in complex systems, you do one thing and it actually leads, it creates a problem you weren't expecting, or an obstacle that you have to overcome. So now you have to adjust that design. Permaculture incorporates that constant iterative observation and integration. The last bit, I think, is use the edges. The edges are really kind of, in life, right, in ecology, the edges are like, that's where the whole game is, right? You have like, forest ecology is interesting, but it is kind of half what edge ecology is. That's where you get things really smashing together. So this is also the opportunity from a design standpoint, is that you can focus attention at the edges, right? If you actually have, not like, in this particular case, right? Now it's not too wild behind it, but if you have a nice little fence and the fence area is taken care of, whatever wildness exists beyond that, in many cases, people will often ignore it. Like it won't bother them as much, because it's very clear attention is being paid to that space, right? It's not an abandoned space. It's a real space that someone's taking care of, because they put up a nice fence and they're maintaining that edge. It also creates real interesting opportunities for diversity, as well as it's where you can maximize the design choices, right? In a really shady area, you have only so many choices. In a really sunny area, you have only so many choices. But when you have these areas that are mixing together, you have a lot more choices, and you can mix things and get some really interesting results. So kind of give you an idea of what this looks like through the years. This is my first attempt at a sustainable garden. This is year 1. So I have this fairly large area of grass and this beauty strip here, trying to figure out what to do with it. I just threw some things in the ground, didn't put a lot of thought into it. This cost me less than $100 in soil and plants and things. By year 2, it had started to become a little bit more robust and fill in. I started to fill in some things. You can see these sunflowers. If you want really interesting, like prolific, like filler inners, if you will, sunflowers, marigolds, zinnias, cosmos, these are great ones because they reseed prolifically. So they will keep reseeding themselves, and they'll just fill in whatever gaps in your landscape you have, they'll fill them up really nicely. And most of them bloom basically all year. By year 3, this is what I have, right? Now, I got an interesting question on Monday. It said, what would you say to somebody who says, well, all I see is a lot of weeds, right? That is a very apt criticism. There are a lot of weeds here, a lot of things people would consider weeds, right? Most of this ground cover in between where you don't see flowers are violets. Violets are a prolific spreader. They're amazing ground cover. They're basically one of the few plants that essentially keep bees and things alive when they come out of hibernation. It is an incredibly valuable plant. It also is perfect for tea. You can make syrup and liqueurs out of it. It is an incredibly valuable plant, and it grows like a weed. So you can just let it take over, right? But there's so much more here, and this is why I tried to show what else is going on here. Some chosen and some have just volunteered. That's a great thing once you build some good soil. Things just want to live in your garden, right? But what you're viewing in this view is almost 150 different species of edible and native plants and flowering plants. So I'm life maxing to the maximum degree. And in the back, I've got a nice like circle of grass where my family can hang out. We've got blackberry here, a big old blackberry bush, which has already produced a gallon of blackberries. We've got cosmos and zinnias and marigolds all along here. We've got a coneflower here. Strawberries are another amazing ground cover. They're evergreen, they spread, and they'll produce strawberries if you want to eat the strawberries. You don't have to, because you'll also feed all sorts of things with those strawberries. This is meadow parsnip, which is in the carrot family. It's a prolific spreader and like prairie plant. This is a winged elm, which is a canopy tree that just decided to live in my yard. I'm letting it grow for the year, and then I'm going to transplant it somewhere where that's more appropriate, because I do not want a 150-foot tree in that particular location. But it decided to come hang out, and if you want to look at it from a financial perspective, that's a $100 tree, right? Like that just decided to grow in my yard. So if we're careful about digging it up and transplanting it somewhere else, I will just give it to one of my members, but we could be selling these things, right? How many things are growing in your yard that you could be selling? Or giving to your neighbors. There's goldenrod. I actually have two types of goldenrod. The tall Canada goldenrod, which is kind of classic, big, flashy goldenrod. And then I've got one called Fireworks, which is a little bit more of a mounded spray. And then of course there's mountain mint, which is, if you've never seen mountain mint, it's a spectacular plant. I can't even describe how beautiful it is, but then it also is like, it is a Grand Central Station for pollinators. Like you will have 100 different species of pollinators on this thing. They're absolutely incredible, and it's a very prolific grower throughout Georgia and in the whole northeast. And this is from last year, so this isn't even this isn't as recent. But just to show you, it's a beautiful place. The problem with sustainable landscapes sometimes is that the beauty is in the experience of being there, right? Now you can capture these really Instagram-worthy moments, right? The little microcosmic moments, but the beauty is in the whole, the totality. I came out one morning, and I had two neighbors who were actually taking pictures of different parts of my yard at the same time. They're of course horrified when I came out. They were absolutely mortified. I was like, no, this is what I did this for. If I didn't want people to enjoy it, I would have put it in my backyard, right? The point is for people to enjoy as they walk through. And people do. I mean, most people bend their walking routes to go by my house because they want to experience this in the summer. And so it's a great connection point. I've met so many neighbors since I started doing this. It's really awesome. But let's talk about some practical stuff here, right? If you're building a home, you have some practical landscape decisions you have to make, right? So oftentimes, hollies, camellias, and azaleas are incredibly available and incredibly cheap and easy to find. And so they're easy ones to choose. They grow, they take up space. You can get azaleas that bloom twice a year. They're really cool plants, plus they're evergreen, right? So they have a lot of benefits. Now, when it comes to holly, if you want a holly, just choose an American holly. It's very simple. There are 20 different species of American hollies, and they're all just as good as the Japanese and Chinese holly. Use an American holly, right? So that's the first one. Camellias are not native. I like to say there's net positive, there's net negatives, meaning they're invasive, and there's some that are just they look good, but they don't really do anything for the ecology. Camellias are largely that. Right? They're not actually, they serve an enormously beneficial aesthetic and design purpose, both with winter flowering as well as the evergreen. They can fill up a small space, a big space. They're an incredibly flexible plant. But the problem is they're not really doing anything. There's not really any native pollinators that are big camellia fans, right? So it's really just about aesthetics. And azaleas, I I love azaleas. So it's hard for me because I really do love azaleas. All azaleas. I have never met an azalea I didn't like. But you can go with the wild native azalea, which is called a flame azalea. Has amazingly gorgeous orange flowers. And it can grow and, it prefers shade, part shade, but it can handle some heat. As long as it's not too much afternoon heat. But it's a wonderful replacement, just one-to-one with azalea. But what I really like to point people to is a plant called pineapple guava. It's a New Zealand native. It's evergreen, it's not invasive, it can grow to be about 8 feet tall by 6, like it's a perfect, just foundational, next to the porch type of plant, right? But here's the kicker. These little flowers you see, they taste like strawberry bubble gum. No joke. You can clip them off and put them in your salads. They are amazing tasting. The problem with that, though, is if you eat all the flowers, you don't get the amazing tasting fruit, which is like a small guava about this size. So imagine like a guava consistency, but it tastes exactly like pineapple. And it grows brilliantly in our climate. And so it's a really great replacement in those kind of foundational spaces. If you need a holly that's going to get 20, 30 feet tall, like more like a small tree, this is not a replacement for that. This is a replacement for shrubs, evergreen shrubs you want under 6 feet. But it's a brilliant replacement for it. So instead of turf, a classic one is Dutch white clover. Now the interesting thing about Dutch white clover is, as you can tell by its name, it's not native and it is incredibly invasive. The thing is that our native pollinators love the heck out of it. So it actually ends up tipping way into the positive category. Now a great no-mow, no water, like drought-tolerant turf combo is to get something like a Dutch white clover mix and violets. Like violets and Dutch white clover, you'll have evergreen lawns. They'll never get over this tall, and you'll have flowers for good chunks of the summer. It's absolutely beautiful, beautiful landscapes. Other a little more finicky ground covers you can use are like creeping St. John's wort. Creeping thyme is really interesting. It's hard to establish from seed, but if you get plugs of it, it can be a really great ground cover. Even an interesting one is Carolina jessamine, which is a very common, it can be a vine, like a growing vine, but it naturally wants to grow along the ground. So like instead of periwinkle or vinca, you can also use Carolina jessamine. Will serve much that same function. You think about how the way periwinkle grows, that's the way it grows. So it kind of creates little kind of gnarly, intertwines with itself and has those beautiful yellow flowers. So there's a lot of interesting ground covers you can use. Coral bells, foam flower are also really great. Wild ginger is a lovely ground cover. Instead of crepe myrtle, oh man, crepe myrtle. It's really hard because it is a perfect landscaping tree. Like it's real, it does not have pollen that affects very many people. It flowers like crazy all year round. You can beat the crap out of it and it'll still grow. And it grows the same way, right? Like we know exactly how it's gonna grow. The problem is it doesn't do anything for our landscape. Like as far as ecology goes, it does nothing. Nothing likes this tree. It is absolutely useless from an ecological standpoint. So what you can do is you can do a variety. So the great thing about crepe myrtle, right, is that basically from spring to summer, like you basically get blooms all year round, all summer long. That's great, right? Eastern redbud is a great replacement as far as like the height requirements, like where you want it to go. But it only looks like this for about 4 minutes, and then all those buds drop off. It is a very beautiful autumn tree, right? And it's heart-shaped leaves, like the way they droop in this rain and stuff. It's a really beautiful understory tree. But how you can get around this is by doing, sometimes, if you have a space that maybe is gonna call for 4 or 5 crepe myrtles, go with 4 or 5 different species that all bloom at different times. So you can start with Eastern redbud that's going to bloom very early in the spring. Then you can move to something like serviceberry, which is beautiful white blooms. That'll be more like June. And then you can start moving to other species after that will kind of bloom as the season goes along. Problem with many blooming trees is spring is when they do it. That's their thing, right? But you can go with loquat. Loquat's an interesting non-native species that has a very interesting fruit. It's evergreen, can be a little bit finicky with hard frost, right? If it's not established, a hard frost could kill it. But it has beautiful white flowers that grow in very early, like late winter, early spring. So it's a great replacement. So you can kind of get that color. You just have to be a little bit more creative about how you get that color. And a lot of these trees are just as easily accessible as a crepe myrtle, right? So they're inexpensive. You can get them if you need them in this particular region. Instead of hosta is a net. It's a net nothing plant. It's not very invasive. It is beautiful. It's very hard to find something that'll grow this reliably in the shade, right? But it doesn't do anything. It literally does nothing for the landscape or the ecology. So foam flower is a good replacement for it. It has a similar kind of spires of the flowers that you're looking for. You can also go with a variety of native, like lilies and irises, right? Which will kind of fill that similar niches there and then throw up flowers at different times, right? Instead of a Japanese maple, again, this is another one that's hard to replace. But sumac is a pretty good contender for it because it actually looks like this most of its life cycle throughout the year. And it grows it's a smallish tree, so it grows in a similar way to a Japanese maple. So if you want that red foliage, like you're really interested in that red foliage, a native sumac could be a good option for switching out.
Not the poisonous kind.
No, I would not get poison sumac. No. And then I already kind of talked about this, but English ivy should never. I mean, it shouldn't even be sold in store. I have no idea why something this. It's up there with kudzu, right? In fact, in many ways, it's actually more annoying than kudzu because at least kudzu goes away in the wintertime, like the leaves do. This thing is just like, no, I'm just going to keep growing. It's going to keep growing year round. It's an absolute nightmare. So Carolina jessamine is a really great replacement for it. Another kind of creeping St. John's wort is an interesting one. Problem with creeping St. John's wort is it's not cheap, so you have to get plugs and it can be kind of expensive. It's not English ivy levels cheap. Creeping Jenny is an interesting one. Most of the cultivars you can get are not native, they're cultivars, but Creeping Jenny, the original plant, is native to North America. And it'll grow in any kind of conditions you give it. So it can be an interesting choice as well.
What is a cultivar?
Cultivar is just like where they took like the raw plant and either mixed it with other species, like other species or other plants in that family to create like a stronger version of it or a different one. Usually they do it for color, right? It'll be like, okay, like for instance, an orange coneflower doesn't exist in our region, right? Orange coneflowers really only exist in mountainous areas. But if you want a coneflower, but you want it to be orange, right? They kind of created this kind of hybrid thing. So if you want to improve the environment, right? Here are some very, very simple ideas. Add trees. Now, we talk so much about canopy trees, and it's very important. Those keystone species trees, the elms, the oaks, the maples, these are incredibly important species to overall survival of forest land and the soil. But what's missing most of the time is a missed opportunity, is the understory, right? So if you have, we often hear like, you actually already mentioned, right? You build the canopy or you build the solar, right? And that is a quandary. It's physical. It's like literally it's one or the other, right? So understory trees can often serve that purpose because they still create that cool microclimate in the yard for the people and the animals, and create jump-off points to the canopy that may be outside Zone 5, for instance, right, around the house. So understory trees are an amazing opportunity for that, to kind of add trees, and they're also the bridge. Understory and shrubs are the bridge to the ground level plants, right? A lot of birds oftentimes exist in two levels, right? So hawks are up here or they're the ground, right? A lot of goldfinches are understory, to like goldenrod and like to the ground kind of level, right? That's how birds exist. They've got the hiding place and where they feed, right? Generally, that's how it works. So understory is that bridge between all the different types of bird species that exist at different levels. Also, you can create succession. This is not it's really not a winning strategy if you're trying to win awards with the picture when you first put stuff in the ground. Succession is not the way to do it. The idea of succession is that you know a landscape wants to change, so plant in accordance for that change, right? A great way to do that would be something like plant a fig tree, get a little one because they're only like $10, they're incredibly cheap. You get a little fig tree and then you plant almost like a prairie around it of faster growing things, and then slowly that fig grows up and starts to shade that area out, and that's when all those strawberries and more ground covery shade things that the prairie stuff shades out during the summer, that's when all those start to come to life. So you plant once for essentially an evolving landscape over 30 years. It's a little bit more difficult from a design standpoint, but it's like the what do they say, the old saw, like, measure twice, cut once. That's all we're doing here, is we're just deciding what we really want this landscape to grow into, and then actually planting for that future. I was supposed to have a slide that like announced what this section was. This is the practical tips for growing a natural envelope, right? So the first one is improve the environment. And that's number one, right? You should be going into the landscape design with the assumption that you are going to leave it better than you found it. If it's a scraped lot, win, because anything's going to be better than that. But oftentimes you're left with something that may be different than that, right? It may have obstacles to it. So if you're thinking first, which you already are, obviously if you're building an Earthcraft home, you're already thinking about how can I make this a sustainable place? If you extend that thinking to the outside first, you're going to find very creative ways to get where you need to go. Sometimes there's physical realities. It just is what it is, right? But you can definitely come up with, there's far more creative decisions available to you than you probably even know until you think about it for a while. Consider the whole property. This is kind of like one of my big hobby horses, is that like we use so little of our properties, right? Like you'll have like a half-acre lot and you're using like a third of it. And the rest of it is just grass, or it's just like, just builder grade landscape. No one put any thought into this. It's not doing anything for anyone other than hopefully it looks good as a snapshot after the landscapers have come and mowed, right? So, but use everything you have. Think about how you can, every part of that property can serve a purpose for the family. So what are things that you can do? How can you create zones of interest? One thing that I think is a really great kind of rule of thumb is when you're thinking about plotting out beds, put an island bed somewhere, right? So if you have, rather than having an expanse of lawn, just put a tree, just put something of a zone of interest right up front. The Realtor Association of America said that it has a guaranteed 2 to 3x return on investment because it's considered a complicated landscape, a more sophisticated landscape, simply by putting an island bed, right? The cost is the same to you, right? You just take that, maybe you don't have a strip in the back, right? And you put that strip in the front instead. But that little bit of complexity, that little bit of sophistication changes people's views of that property and the potential for it. So I kind of want to, this is an example of considering the whole property. This area right here is the 6 foot, 7 foot, like just space between the house and the property line, right? This is a no man's, like this is like, why does this space exist, right? It exists probably because of zoning, right? It probably is because it needed to be so far away from the next house or from the property line. So but they also had an added issue of like water pooling there all the time. So I have another picture that shows you more of this alley. But what we decided to do was turn it into a 2-tiered terraced garden. They already had blackberries planted up here and a peach down here. So we really kind of used the peach as the focal point. You see something and you want to go to it. So now we gave them a pathway to walk towards it. And it's bounded on both sides. On this other side here, you can kind of see the edge of a rain garden we built. So it's like a nice little like grotto area. And other than when the sun's directly overhead, it's actually relatively cool. And the homeowners we built this for, sometimes they'll just put their chairs in that little nook. It's like just a nice little place to sit. And this is using a part of their property that just like, I mean, it has no other purpose, right? It doesn't serve any kind of environmental or living purpose. Collect water. This is almost sacrilegious, I think, because most people want to get water off of a property as quickly as possible, right? That's causing enormous headaches for our downstream systems, right? It also is the main reason why we have to keep watering our beds, right? Because we don't capture the water. So what you're trying to do here is like, it's kind of like just a little like mnemonic here, but you want to slow it down, you want to pool it round, and then when you want to sink it down. The idea is that you want to keep as much of that water on site as possible so that it will infiltrate into the ground and replenish the groundwater table. It'll also keep your things, keep your plants watered. Now that doesn't mean that you pool the water right next, right next to the house or somewhere where it's going to damage things. But there are almost always like natural depressions. There's obvious places where the water wants to go. You can also slow it down sometimes with just ridges. They call them swales. Is you just kind of create a ridge so the water kind of has to infiltrate, and it slows it down so that it can sink into the ground, which is what you ultimately want. Here's an example of, so if that kind of terrace garden was here, this is what was near the house. Now they had an enormous problem with just water sitting on the surface and like just bumping up against their foundation. Now they've got, it's cement, right? So it's not a terrible, it's not like wood where it's gonna rot or anything. But what we did was we actually dug a deeper depression that goes to where they already had an outlet coming from their roof, so we could capture that water. These are all water-loving plants, and it can kind of sit there for a little bit. Any overflow goes where they want the overflow to go, naturally, and the rest sinks into the ground. So that peach tree right adjacent to it is consistently watered. You never have to water that peach tree, right? So this is a way of collecting water where it wants to sit and then sinking it into the ground. What we ultimately did is they had a similar issue on the other side of the fence as we actually extended this all the way to the other side, which provides another outlet. So it's kind of like a largish pool filled with plants and things like that. Follow the sun. So this is interesting. This is a part where it gets a little bit into building science, like the built environment, not just the garden environment. But think about, where are the windows? I know in an urban and suburban environment, oftentimes you're stuck with the direction the house has to face, right? But you're maybe not stuck with the direction the windows have to face. So think about where the windows are, so that they're capturing passive heat, or they're capturing heat during the winter, right? But then they're shaded during the summer, so those same spaces are not able to heat the house as much. You can create natural shade. There's a little diagram I do on the next slide. Capture winter heat. That's a real way to lower people's bills, is if you just find ways to let the house passively heat up throughout the winter day, it can actually really save a lot of money in the long run. So this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? So obviously the sun moves in the sky throughout the year, right? At a roughly, this would be south, right? So the sun is always where we are on the world, it's always in the southern hemisphere. So at its topmost, it'll be up here about, like 80 degrees or so. And then in the winter, it's down quite low, right? And so this is what I'm showing here. Now the interesting thing is, if this is the south side of the house, if you had windows here, right, with maybe some shrubs, maybe even ideally things that are not evergreen shrubs, like possibly perennial or deciduous shrubs, right? So in the summer, when you're getting all that direct sunlight, the shrubs are blocking the south-facing windows to a degree that is actually shading things, but it's producing all this sun for your garden, right? Which would be great on the south side. But then in the winter, the sunlight is coming at like this. These deciduous shrubs have dropped their leaves, and so have the trees. So now that winter sunlight can go through the trees and enter the southern, south-facing windows. So this is a permaculture concept of how to control, when I talk about observing how sun moves over the property, this is exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And you can control the shade levels with what you plant where and where they are in relationship to the sun. Native first, edible second. Aesthetics third, I guess you could say, is the kind of next thing. Use natives where possible. And when you can, use the real native. So Echinacea purpurea, right, is what you want. You don't want, Echinacea X, Astra, Pocono red, right? Like that is not an Echinacea, right? That is a Frankenflower. So you want to use the original flower as much as you possibly can. Include edibles. I already talked about carrots, but there's lots of other plants. Like I think all the brassicas, so the brassicas are broccoli, cabbage, kale, collard greens, right? All of the brassicas are amazing winter plants, right? Because not only do you get collards, but if you let the collards together make a great ground cover, right, that you can eat. But then if you let them bolt and go to seed, they produce a gorgeous yellow flower off of a stem, and you can eat the flowers too. So when they're buds, before they open up, just cut the stalk off and saute it. It's like broccolini. I mean, it's amazing, and all the brassicas do this, with the exception of broccoli, which what you're eating is all the other brassicas seed head, right? That's what broccoli is. So there's lots of edible plants that can serve aesthetic purposes in a garden, especially perennial bushes. Chokecherry, blueberries are an amazing edible hedge, right? And then when you're going for aesthetics, like only use the net zero plants. Like the hostas are acceptable in moderation, right? Camellias are acceptable in moderation. There are definitely plants that are fine to use. The problem is not that they're bad so much as they're just overused, right? Autumn ferns are now on the invasive list because it turns out that they're not as sterile as we thought, and they're invading all of our creek beds, like just absolutely choking creek beds. So they've kind of escaped containment. Dr. Malcolm from Jurassic Park would be very happy with that as an example of it. The last one, this is an interesting thing, is use what's there. When you get on site, if you're going through that observation phase, you're going to find a lot more than you know that could be used. Broken up cement and concrete, stones, bricks, plants that are maybe there already, but just in a dumb place, right? So there's a lot of stuff on site already that you can use. I take advantage of the freestones and edging material that is like lousy in our soil, in urban Atlanta especially. Like there are just layers and layers of bricks in that soil. And so if you do any digging at all around the site, you're going to find tons of bricks. I think I was talking to you a couple, last year about you had like a huge pile of dirt and rocks and bricks. And I'm like, man, I wish I could just pay 20 people to just sort that pile. Because we'd end up with $1,000 worth of pebble stones, right? Which we go to Home Depot and buy in bags at $10 a bag, right? And it's just in our ground. So if that is economical to do, use what is available. Topography is also your friend, right? So if there's a natural depression somewhere on the site, use that for water catchment because you don't have to dig it out, it already exists. And then natural elements as quote unquote garden gnomes, right? So you pull up you cut down a holly and you pull up its stump. That stump, placed correctly in context, becomes like a garden feature, right? I love to do that with semi-rotting logs, like big logs. You can just put them in a natural landscape. And because it's a natural landscape and not a stylized modern landscape, those natural elements, which are provided for us for free, become available and usable aesthetic things. We love using fallen logs and limbs as edging material, right? So they're really great edging material, and then it breaks down and you get more and you just keep replacing it, and it's free. So this is an example of this. This is one of our members. I had this idea to do a kind of a bird bath thing and kind of give them reclaim this circle from the forest that their yard has become in the back. And that was the idea. It was actually very simple. It was just going to be, pine bark and just like edged with wood. It was going to be a very simple thing. But as we got into the ground, it turned out there was already this gigantic like path that led to the shed that was already paved, and it was under like 3 inches of dirt. So I reclaimed all those bricks and instead made this kind of like Wizard of Oz yellow brick road kind of pathway from their back porch into this area. And this is kind of like a close-up of it. Now what we're gonna do here, this is unfinished, is we're gonna do what we call living mortar. So you just fill everything with dirt and then put things like Dutch white clover and little dichondra is good as well. Just little things, and what will happen is their roots will actually kind of seal those bricks together, and it'll actually make it tighter, so there won't be like bricks flopping around and stuff. So this whole area is going to be like almost like instead of a yellow brick road, it's going to be like a green brick road, right? We can also transplant. They have a lot of moss in various places. We can scrape it off and transplant the moss onto some of the edges of the bricks and things. So when I finish this, which I'm actually doing tomorrow, it's going to be this kind of pine bark all around it to edge it off with plants all along, and it will connect to their patio. And then back here where it terminates is where they have some of their dogs have been buried. So we're going to do a little memorial to the dogs there, which will have a bench they can sit on with a planter attached to the bench. So it's like this nice little space that they can walk. They can sit here and pet the dogs, or they can kind of think about the dogs that have passed. But this cost them nothing but labor because all the materials were already on site. This is another kind of example of using what's there. This is a school courtyard. This is actually my youngest elementary. He just graduated. My wife did all the good stuff, like she was on the PTO. She gave back for 12 years to the school, and I was finally like, you know what, I need to do something too. So we did the renovation of this courtyard that they had. This was an attempted pond that was all dug out, but for some reason, whoever built it put landscaping fabric instead of plastic, so it just was more like a rain garden, really. So we dug all that out. We got rid of, like, they had tons of bricks and things, which you'll see. You see this big pile of bricks and stones, right? This is part of our, like, site audit. When we show up, we just sort of like, what is on site? What could be used? They already had, this was actually cemented in, so we were not moving that. But we have, we have natural drainage, like we have to deal with the drainage. There's some things we have to deal with this site. So this is what we ended up doing, is all these stones were just reclaimed stones. So this was done for about $1,200 in materials. We gave the labor for free it was a donation to the school. But you can kind of see, you remember that year 3 picture of my yard? That's what this is gonna look like, right? These are all like 1 gallon in quart-sized plants, so they're very small. So I talk about with these landscapes, not being as photogenic in year 1. All this is just gonna grow up, right? And this will be a lush place. This is actually supposed to be a pollinator way station, like it was officially on the map of pollinator way stations. But the landscaping crew steadily killed all of the pollinators, so now it's going to be that way station yet again. And it ultimately goes back to this Carolina jessamine arbor back there. There's a bench there, and then the greenhouse, and then we're just going to start growing some veggies there. What we're going to do in the summer is we're going to finish the pond. So that's going to be the next phase. So this is a good example of just using what's there. All these tchotchkes and stuff were all just stuff they had lying around. So we just put it in a better arrangement and use what we had. This is kind of a glamour shot, if you will. Another one, kind of show the backside. So the original picture is facing out this. This is an established Joe Pye weed. So we just pried the raised bed wood away from it and just incorporated it into a full bed. This is another one, a project we worked on. I think the homeowner felt kind of bad about how kind of chaotic the backyard was, but I actually think a lot of people's spots in their yards look like this, where they just have, it's like the remains of all the ideas they had about what they want to do with their backyard, right? And so what we did was, I know she was on a tight budget. She had a lot of irises and a lot of ferns and things already on site. So what we did is we dug them up, divided them so that we could use them. And this is the finished product. I really wish I was a better photographer because you can't really tell, because of the color gradient, you can't tell as much difference between the path and the bed. But she was really adamant about cedar mulch. But this is a pine path that goes around. That is going to be a big flowering dogwood that's going to grow up out of that middle area with a bird bath. And as you can see, we've transplanted a lot of these irises to various places so that we could use what she already had on site. So this is a project me and Thomas worked on. We had some interesting design choices we had to make with this. I'll show them more in the back, right? The front was going to be a much more, little kind of like postage stamp kind of garden. Like it just was a standard kind of garden in front. And then the back, we had, and this is what this looks like now. I would say this is close to a year 2 version of this. You can kind of see on one side, we've got some irises. This is an echinacea, which of course is going to be significantly higher when it grows. This is a Florida anise, which is a native foundational plant, something I didn't mention. It's evergreen, and that yellow color is amazing. And it's a great hedge. Like it'll fill that space in this corner. Then we've got dianthus. This is a sage of some sort that's going to grow up fairly big in the back. So what you're actually going to have in about a month and a half is this whole area here will be filled with flowers because all these things kind of get taller and bigger. And this is the other side. This is one of my old standards. I love coreopsis. Coreopsis is amazing. A little flower, comes in a bunch of varieties. But this is the back. This is an interesting thing is he had a lot of water drainage issues. And here's the AC unit where the AC unit was going to go. There was tons of water pooling. Now, when you look at it, it's very clear why there's drainage issues. There's, for some reason, a large pile of logs sitting there blocking the main path for all the water that wants to escape down this alleyway. So what we did was we just built a rain sink, a water garden rain sink there. So that water will come in. You can kind of see that it stops here, it slows down, and then it moves into that space. The ultimate goal was to kind of move this bed out a little bit, to incorporate that and then kind of move the water garden out a little bit. But you can see that it collects that water and then it funnels it away. Now there are a bunch of plants in here. You can kind of see they're very small now. A shade rain garden is like the slowest growing thing you can imagine. But again, it's gonna be like everywhere else. It's gonna fill with the flowers and that really fill up that space. This is an interesting edible use. This is a bronze fennel. It's fennel. It's like if you want to use it for fennel. It also is a beautiful, like just bronze color, like ferny looking plant. All right, that is it. I am done. Sorry. Yeah.